didn't get off the ground well. I said, you could have sent me a blog. But she asked me what she like this. And the Conscious Life Expo, why to do it? I mean, I have my goals. But anyways, so I'm thinking Ascension for me is almost like how to, well, I did take DMT, so I know what it was like.
My booklet explains the stages from awakening, which is happening, to transmutation, to repair and clear all the negativity of this
Yeah,
trauma.
I'm starting to forgive
And then
people.
and then you start to embody fifth dimensional consciousness at the consistent level. And then you start to create a whole new network.
And then what is the sixth dimension?
It's all in it.
It's all. Well, I'm looking forward to, so what are you speaking at?
On Sunday, I'll speak on that.
Is that on Monday?
Sunday.
Oh, that's right during the Super Bowl. Hey, I'm a big sports fan, but it does not come close to God, spirituality, and health. I don't bet. This is where it's okay. So thank you. This is, I'm so happy.
You'll see. It'll all make sense here.
Oh, yeah. It was great. I saw him in the chat.
Glare back there. Is it better across for you? Is it less glare? Being in the front, is that better?
You got scared,
Glare is
huh?
better?
Oh, good, yeah.
Yeah.
Better. Yeah, yeah, no, that's, no, you could say. Okay, yeah.
Usually a free roamer, but they got me on the
I
mic.
haven't eaten. I haven't. And Jared is up there in the room. He said if I got
In and out of the chicken feed, you know.
God bless me. Jared is, I was asking, do you know where the Advil is?
I
Because I
took
was
my
getting a
weight
headache
during
last
into
night.
that. So,
Does it touch me? Oh, this is, yeah, this is the shoulder effect. I was scraping off the Band-Aid, you know, gooey, Larry. Who?
No, I'm actually, I grew up in Illinois, went to college here, and then I lived in California for almost 30 years.
Not Sean. Wait, this is Sean. This is Sean.
I love the state, it's great.
Nothing
I've
like,
got friends down here, but
I know, but I've never heard him speak like he did last night, okay? So, I was not impressed. My life. Great, I feel yucky, and my hips hurt, I'm in bad trouble. I am so sorry, and I'm looking for a pen, cause I'm a note taker. Here's that, and I'll show you how to take notes last night for Sean. But you know what, he speaks nothing like he did, I listened to him last night, okay? Last night was not good. There were two philosophical and spiritual.
Welcome, everyone, so bright and early on the second day of Conscious Life Expo. Hasn't this been amazing?
Yes.
Incredible. Such a showing of us to show up and know that we are here for the planetary awakening. We are here to come together, inform ourselves, and evolve forward. And such incredible teachers here. We are so blessed. And the Down the Rabbit Hole track. Conscious Life Expo has kept up to speed with what's happening. This is incredible. Thanks to Brandy back there. It was her vision to bring this to us. I supported her and many others, but it takes a village to accomplish the planetary awakening, as you know. And so what we're doing here in the Down the Rabbit Hole track is really showcasing the heroes of this movement. The heroes that have been studying the truth information, because this is the time when it's meant to come up to the surface and be exposed to all of us, to have the hidden come up and have us really know what's going on in the world, what has gone on in the past, and what is going to be coming up. And Brad Olsen is one of those heroes. He has tirelessly researched ancient history and what's going on in our earth so that we can really know what's true about that and understand where we've been as a civilization before and possibly know where we're going. And he has done this his whole life in so many ways. He's written 10 award-winning books. He's been on all the big conferences and interviews like Coast to Coast and Contact in the Desert, and he tirelessly goes around and continues to give his information. So you're really lucky to be here today, to have a personal viewpoint into him. And one thing he's going to share with you about also is Antarctica, because I'm sure you've heard there's a lot coming out that's being revealed on that. And he is on the forefront of that information and much, much more. So I present now Brad Olsen. You're welcome.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. Be a little taller than Deborah, so get that going on. As Deborah mentioned, I did go to Antarctica 4 years ago. I was just getting off the boat this time. Quite a journey, and I have a whole presentation about the hidden anomalies of Antarctica, which I'm going to be giving on the cruise in April. If anybody wants to do that, use Brad Olsen promo code. And that's the full story of not just my trip. I try to make myself kind of secondary to all this, but what I like to do is just give the data, just the information that I found, including all the weird stuff going on down there and the speculation about what might exist under the ice. And indeed, Antarctica is one of those places where so little is really truly known and only has been mapped in less than 100 years. I say in my talk, the hidden anomalies of Antarctica, and it applies here too, that flat Earth is Antarctica denial. So I am a spherical earther unabashedly. I've been there. I've been around the world at the equator, and I've been to within a degree or two of the Arctic Circle and the Antarctic Circle. And I'll tell you, it gets colder the farther you go north, and it's quite hot along the equator. I've been to all 7 continents, and so I bring to you this presentation, which is brand new, about a lot of information that I have uncovered from Antarctica to the early maps and this incredible new information about polygonal architecture being found around the world. This is what's so fascinating, and even underwater. So we're going to go to a lot of places. It's a real global kind of presentation. Let's start here with Antarctica. There's a map that came out just about a year before my trip, and it shows areas of Antarctica that are heating up and cooling off. So Mother Nature, in her infinite wisdom, is keeping the ocean levels balanced. I had been living just less than a mile away from the coast in Santa Cruz, where they have the famous boardwalk, and even after these big storms, I was just out there a few days ago before coming down here, and boardwalk's still there. Yeah, oceans have not risen like Al Gore told us. We'd be underwater by now. So there are areas that it does heat up. And on the far left upper corner, that's called the Palmer Peninsula. You'll see it a bunch in some of these early maps. That is Western Antarctica, and that's the area that I went to. And I can tell you, no doubt, that there are earth changes afloat, including the melting of the ice in this particular area and changes in behavior with the penguins colonies. The cold water penguins are struggling right now because the warm weather penguins are moving into their territory. Porpoises do not live that far south, nor do Dolphins. We saw them on the boat trip over on the Drake Passage, but then they don't go that far. Seals, although, live quite well, and the leopard seals feed off of the penguins.
We have all kinds of seals up at Hollywood Beach and
Sure.
incredible.
So the Age of Discovery maps, which I'm going to show you here in a minute, about a dozen that were drawn in the centuries before Antarctica was even discovered. So isn't it interesting that we say in cartography that we read a map, like you read a book. You're reading lines on a page. And these are a couple of my maps. I'm also a cartographer. I've illustrated and drawn maps for a lot of my books in the Sacred Places series, which, by the way, after this talk, I'm going to be out at the P1 booth. I've got some of my books there. You guys are welcome to come up, ask some more questions, and take a look at some of these books. And, oh, I should also mention that at 2 o'clock, I'm going to fill in for Laura Eisenhower. It's going to be a free event called The Hidden Esoteric in Plain Sight. I'm also a book publisher, and I'm doing Laura's book, and her first book will come out spring of 2024. She did not make it. She had some problems with her flights, I guess. So because I'm kind of really affiliated with her work and I know her talk. So my other talk is Hidden Esoteric in Plain Sight, which supports my Esoteric series book. So esoteric, what is it? Esoteric just means that all that information that has been withheld from humanity. And that includes the history of this world, that I think we all have a right to know this stuff. And why was it excerpted and edited out of the history books when we were kids? So Antarctica is quite a fascinating continent, looked at it from many different ways. This is basically where the ice flows, and now you can see that gap between South America and the Palmer Peninsula. That's called the Drake Passage, and it is the stormiest sea in the world. You gotta believe I got quite seasick. 2/3 of our crew, I was on a sailboat going across the Drake. Yeah, 72-foot sailboat, and we were just fine pulling out of the Beagle Channel there down in Ushuaia. It's the southernmost city of the world. And once we got on the Drake, boy, I can't tell you how big the waves were, about 3 stories tall. Wow. And when I finally was able to go up on watch, because we all had to volunteer to help the captain look out for icebergs, that I'd be up there and I'd be, oh, we were so screwed. You just see this wall of water wave, but then it just goes down and the boat pops up to the top. You're like, oh, wow, great view. Oh, there's some albatross way over there. And then down you go again. So can you imagine that for, it was a 92-hour trip. We got onto the Drake after about 8 hours. So, yeah. And finally pulled into an island just off of the chain of islands called King George Island, where there was a base that we finally stepped on terra firma and got a warm meal and a shower, and the one place they had internet we could use. Let everybody know we made it. It was pretty dicey though for a while there, but the ship never took on water, and my dad had a sailboat. I know that as long as you're keeping the hull dry, no water coming in, you're gonna make it. We did sustain some damage though on the ship. Took a couple rogue waves and knocked out the instrument panel. There was a secondary deck for the captain outside the inside cabin, and there was several $1,000s worth of damage. And we lost the little dinghy. Just came off the boat, waves washing over. I mean, it was pretty horrendous conditions, but we made it. Okay, so what could be hidden under the ice? Well, first of all, it's really important to understand, and I do go into this in much greater detail in the Hidden Anomalies of Antarctica talk, that there are over 1,300 active volcanoes worldwide, and about 100 of those are on Antarctica. This is worldwide, so that means under the ocean, on all the continents, And Antarctica, just on that continent alone, 100 active volcanoes. So that gives the propensity for large under ice cavities. It's very geothermically active, and the Germans knew this. This was one of their maps, and you can see their claim called New Schwabenland. Here's a fault line that goes directly through, including New Schwabenland, which was the German claim. And they found a place called the Schumacher Ponds, named after the navigator Schumacher, who landed a seaplane on lakes that never freeze and land that there are no trees in Antarctica. There's no bushes either. There's very little green. That's what struck me is you see the main colors blue, white, and black. And all the other browns and greens and oranges, don't see those down there. It is about as close to an alien planet here on Earth as you're ever going to find. So this system that runs right down the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, all the way up to Iceland, from Iceland to Antarctica and beyond, is this rift zone with volcanic activity. And you can also see that it almost hits the South Pole there, which is concurrent to where the big hole under the ice is that Linda Moulton Howe and her whistleblower named Brian S. speak about. And I would concur that that is the location as best as I can coordinate it. I'm going to do a talk next year called Birds Antarctica, where I'll go into the hole in the ice and Operation High Jump and more weird and wonderful things about Antarctica. But suffice it to say that these fault lines actually are very critical. So here's a picture I took, two pictures actually, of these islands which are beginning to show. So the first one, the painting, was in the galley in Palmer Station, and this is an American base. And he said, take a picture of that, and I'll show you the significance of it in a moment. And that is what that looks like now. And that pile there in the middle is called Pie Island, because on Pie Day, which I think is sometime in the middle of March, the ice bridge collapsed and a new island appeared. And you'll see why that's significant in a minute. But like I said in the beginning, the mapping and the actual physical features, the cartography of Antarctica, are still being discovered. Another map of the rift zone and many of those volcanoes that exist. So this is a great book that I've read called Map of the Ancient Sea Kings. And this really gave me a lot of impetus for this book, because it starts out with this Piri-Reis map. How many of you heard of the Piri-Reis map? Yeah, about half of you, that's good. Because it's really incredible. Drawn in 1513, so remember, Columbus discovered America, 1492. So only 21 years after Columbus got here, we get this incredible masterpiece. And I think you can see already quite clearly the outline of South America. I'm going to show you some comparisons of the Caribbean. They were doing a different sort of projection of the maps in Piri-Reis days. And as you can see on the bottom, there's that hump of Antarctica leading right on over to New Schwabenland, including the Larsen ice shelf. We'll get into some detail on that. But suffice it to say that this map is probably one of the most significant early maps there are. And while this diagram seems to think that the islands represented here are from South America, I would say that they're probably the ones depicted there. Falkland Islands, South Shetland Islands. These are some of the least visited places in the world. And the British Admiralty would take their information back every time they would confirm a new island. And there's this funny little story of an island off of Ireland called Hy Brazil, Hy Brazil. You guys ever heard of that? It was this mythical land, and the Admiralty only took it off in around 1850. They said, no, it's not there. We've sailed it so many times, we can't find it. And just another Irish myth, it seems. But this much is true, that on the Piri Reis map, it is a known copy of a much older map. He says that in the liner notes here. And it dates from the time of the Library of Alexandria. This is a very old source map. And during the time, in the age of the exploration, this being after Columbus and the discovery of the Americas. And by the way, Columbus went to his grave never believing he discovered the New World. He thought that those islands he saw, Hispaniola, Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Leeward and Wayward Islands down in the Caribbean, he thought they were the Spice Islands. He thought they were the Maldives and Sri Lanka off of India, and Java, which is actually the Spice Island, to his dying day. But he still gets credit, of course. He did an incredible journey, not to downplay what he did. And he used this Piri Reis map. It says also in the liner notes that this was a map of what Columbus had also used as well. So here's some different projections of the Piri Reis map on the Caribbean. Okay, not too exact, but at least the outline of South America and what does appear to be Cuba and Hispaniola, which is today Haiti and Dominican Republic, are represented fairly accurately. Again, the projection technique before Mercator, and I'm going to talk about Mercator and his contribution to cartography in a moment, was they would just get a source like that round circle there and then plot their different landforms. Of course, Africa, very clearly seen on the Piri Reis map, as well as Spain. And at that time, Spain had just gone to war with the Spanish or with the Muslim people, and that was a big movement to get the Muslims out of Spain. But if you go to southern Spain, such as Granada, you'll find really incredible Muslim-inspired buildings in southern Spain. So this map's kind of interesting. You see a little sultan hanging out in Africa, some other, I think that is Granada in the bottom of Spain there. So they're putting little plate cards on here, and African American on the bottom of Africa there, and an elephant and exotic animals. So you can obviously tell that they already knew quite a bit about the African coastline. And now Piri Reis was an admiral in the Turkish Navy, so he was Muslim and therefore would portray things for that. And it does say in the appended notes that the maps of the Western lands drawn by Columbus. So they were trading maps. And in the age of exploration, if you were to capture an enemy ship, the first thing they would do is get into the captain's quarters, into the lockbox, and get their maps. The maps were actually carried more weight than gold or silver or any kind of treasure, because the maps told you where you could go, new lands, new exploits. So when you look at this map of South America, here you also have, yeah, of course, mythical figures. This guy, no body, he's kind of my favorite, and all kind of exotic animals that you find in South America, especially in the Amazon region of the jungle. And there you see the mouth of the Amazon Delta and the hump that is now Brazil, as well as starting to extend more southward. Now here's the map of Antarctica. This is on the Piri Reis map. Now there is no animals, there's no mammals, there's no snake, there's no antelope down there. The only mammals that can exist in Antarctica are marine mammals such as whales and seals and penguins, of course, as birds. But on the land, the very largest animal is just a tiny little spriggate insect. It's the only thing that can survive those harsh winters where below the Arctic Circle, you get 24 hours of darkness. We were there just about 6 weeks after the solstice. Of course, seasons are flipped down there. So I got to see the midnight sun, which is kind of cool. It would kind of be about 15 hours of daylight, 2 hours of twilight on either end, and only about 3 or 4 hours of darkness. So we got within 1 degree of the Antarctic Circle to the Vernansky base. So this is why I showed that picture that I took of islands still being discovered. Because this, I believe, is the Larsen ice shelf. That is between the Palmer Peninsula and that New Schwabenland area. Queen Maud Land is what you'd find it called on maps today. But interestingly, if we were to take the ice off of Antarctica, this is what you find. And look at that. Right in that bay, there is a great big island. Let me just go back and show you. But keep an eye on these islands. A little bit of representation there. Those are still firmly under the ice. That is one giant ice shelf, as is this other bay, the Ross Ice Shelf. And the very first thing we saw crossing the Drake Passage were flat-topped chunks of ice that were absolutely enormous. I come from Chicago. In downtown Chicago, we have one of the biggest buildings called the Merchandise Mart. That's what it instantly reminded me of. A 30-story, flat-top, giant building that was just floating, cracked off the ice shelf. And they call it calving when a glacier breaks off. Right now is the time that the glaciers are calving down there. And you could have pieces breaking off the size of some of our smaller states like Rhode Island or Delaware. So it's actually not uncommon, but it does seem to be occurring more frequently because there are climate disruptions. It's another map of what Antarctica looks like without the ice on the overhead. And on this projection, you see a little gap between Western Antarctica and what's known as Eastern Antarctica. And so the region with the small fjord, that is where the New Schwabenland, the German base was. And it's known that they were going there with their U-boat submarines.
Can you have a pointer?
Sure. It would be here. That fjord, even though it looks like the smaller of the several, is still hundreds of miles long. So can you imagine getting in under the ice in a U-boat and going up hundreds of miles and then finding some of these heat vents? And that's how they created their new Berlin base, or Base 211. And I've interviewed on Ancient Aliens talking about this. So let's go to some of these maps, and you'll see, interestingly enough, that you have these representations of Antarctica. Now, this is the very first map. It's actually drawn by Martin Walsee-Müller, German, but he had a passenger named Amerigo Vespucci. You might have heard of him. And here's the first signature of America. That's where the continents got their name. He signed this map quite prominently. Now, where in the Americas will you find that? Because here's the full map to the right. I'll show you. This is here. So that's Patagonia. That's way down in South America. And you can see on the blow up here, they already had some colonies. They already had some, names of the landforms. And this is 1507. So this is a little bit before the Piri-Reis map. But here we have a depiction of the entire world. That's why this map is so important. For the first time, it marks the Americas, the Western Hemisphere, is a distinct continent surrounded by water. Columbus would have looked at this map and wouldn't believe it's true. He said, no, that's not what it is. It's like the old Ptolemy map, which was just Africa, Europe, and Asia for thousands of years. That was the world map. But then this comes along in the age of discovery, and we start getting the landforms. You can see how undeveloped North America is, although the Caribbean, again, looks very similar to Piri Reis. I wouldn't be surprised if they're exchanging information. And along comes Magellan in 1520. This is Magellan's map on the right, and he, of course, was the first mariner to sail around the world. And the very instrumental find, which is still called the Magellan Straits, is right down there on the southern tip. Now, Magellan's map is flipped upside down to reflect the South America true map. And there you can see the Magellan Straits going through between southern Patagonia and Terra del Fuego, that big island on the southern tip of South America, which was, I thought, when I was going down there, oh, cool, land of fire. There'll probably be volcanoes everywhere and some kind of cool features. That's not how it got its name. Other mariners who went through the Strait of Magellan, based on Magellan's map, that got around, and I'll show you how in a moment. They would go through the Strait of Magellan and they would meet or see in the distance these great big bonfires that the Patagonian giants, you think I'm tall, these guys were even taller than me, and they were huge. There are pictures I show in my Hidden Anomalies of Antarctica talk where the Europeans come up to here on them. And they were basically naked in one of the most inhospitable places in the world, just wearing a hide over their front and even run around barefoot. And so it got the name Terra del Fuego from the bonfires of the Patagonian Indians, who are all extinct now. They got wiped out. Very, very few native people in Chile or Argentina survive. Only 1% of the population. They did not fare too well there. Bolivia, Peru, Ecuador is another story. Culture still pretty well intact. So Magellan makes this famous voyage. He loses 2 ships in South America, and one ship went mutiny and went back to Spain. Started out as a 5-ship armada. Magellan made it through with another ship. He eventually was killed in the Philippines, never even finished the trip. They lost another ship in Southeast Asia, and only 18 of the 250 some people that started that trip with him a few years earlier made it back to Spain. And fortunately, one of those survivors was the Italian chronicler of the trip named Pigafetta, and I talk about him in the Hidden Anomalies, or my South America talk. So we do have a very clear description of Magellan's journey. But as it applies here, you can see that Magellan thought that Terra del Fuego would lead to this southern continent. And then in subsequent years, Magellan gets the credit, Strait of Magellan. Here's several maps of Finney, Appian, and Munster, who also depicted the Straits of Magellan connecting to a southern continent. And the bottom color map is the Finney map, and you can see how Antarctica wraps around. It is this southern continent, and now we're starting to see North America start to get filled in, as well as South America and Central America as well. I should point out that the ancient Greeks were the very first to theorize there must be a southern continent. They were the first to also map the curvature of the earth by using shadows, and would have an exact distance between a southern location in Egypt and up to Alexandria. And were able to calculate the curvature of the earth with remarkable accuracy. So they already knew that we were living on a sphere, and they also knew that most of the land continents were up here. So that suggests to me that the Greeks were actually far more proficient in exploring, or at least comparing notes with the Phoenicians, who were traveling here to North America as well as to the land of Punt to collect gold, which is presumed to be Australia. So a worldview was already starting to develop in the age of the ancient Greeks, and they named it Antarctica. The Greeks named it that. Now, what does that mean? The Greeks were big into astrology, and in the northern hemisphere, over the polar regions, is a place called, a constellation called Arctica. And they presumed that the southern land was the opposite of Arctica, so they call it Antarctica. And I think this translated to the early mappers, because the early mappers clearly are putting this southern continent on there, but I don't think they really knew any of the contours other than that Strait of Magellan. So as the decade or the century after Columbus and Piri Reis, now you start getting place names on both coasts. Patagonia, pretty well defined, but Tierra del Fuego still connecting to Terra Australis Incognita. And you'll also see Australis represented on these old maps. When they discovered Australia, it got the place name. And then Antarctica reverted back to the Greek name. Some other maps showing also the Straits of Magellan. Now this Mercator map is very significant, 1569, because it also starts to show the globe in a proper representation. So basically the Mercator map went from 2D flat to 3D round by using the projection. And we see that on maps today. When you have the Mercator projection, you see how big Antarctica is on just a flat map. But if you look on a 3D globe, it's about the size it normally is. And this was a great contribution to map making and understanding the world itself. Now, what's interesting on the Mercator map, you can see in red, it says Terra del Fuego. So now Terra del Fuego is becoming part of this mythical southern continent. And there's a good picture of the Patagonian Indians with a European. Look at that little shrimpy guy. But they were very friendly. There was never confrontations. It was just mainly they lost their resources. The Europeans basically cut them off, and there were other nefarious deeds that went with their extinction. Now here's another very interesting map. This comes from the other side of the world. This is when the Chinese started plotting the Pacific Basin, including North America and there's South America, with the Drake Passage intact. A whole different group of cartographers under the Chinese emperors in 1421. So we got Columbus beat by several decades here, and look at how complete that map is. And once again, knowledge of Antarctica. And here's the full Mercator map, 1569, and it says in the liner notes, the new and more complete representation of the terrestrial globe, properly adopted for use in navigation. And he is the inventor of the world map, which gave the chart to be used by sailors. Now, the main challenge to early mariners was not longitude, that is north-south. It was east-west, longitude. And it was the British who invented the first machine that could be brought onto ships, which started with the Greenwich Mean Time. So it was in Greenwich, England, where the British Academy put out a reward who can properly, accurately tell our mariners where they are east to west. And that's why we still, to this day, start our time zone with Greenwich Mean Time. They got the naming rights. But here's the Mercator map with the full view of Antarctica and just a narrow Magellan Strait down there. And he thought it was Terra del Fuego. And there's a very early representation of Australia, too. And here's that map from the Bache map, which shows that gap through the middle of Antarctica. And at this point in 1737, they had already separated, and you can see Terra del Fuego as a smaller island at the southern tip of South America. They had already separated it and created the Drake Passage. Some other world maps in that age show Antarctica, which what appears to be covered in ice at that size and pretty approximate ice flow. The second slide I showed, there it is up close. And that's what, if you threw the ice and the ice sheets and some of the calving glaciers, that's what it would look like, the Finney map. Now, why is it called the Drake Passage? Well, he went through the Strait of Magellan 57 years after Magellan. They all knew it by then. He went around through to the Pacific, and then the Golden Hind, his ship, got blown off course. He got blown back into the Atlantic, and his navigators knew, we're back in the Atlantic, so we need to go to the Pacific. So he went back, and he got the naming right, the Drake Passage, that stormy sea. And then they went on to come all the way up to western coast of South America, as far north as the Oregon Dunes. There we go. And then across and around the world. First British mariner to circumnavigate. And then he fell out of favor with Queen Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen, who had, at the time of Shakespeare and Sir Francis Bacon, ended his life in jail. Even though he was very successful. What he was most successful with was piratry. They would pirate the Spanish galleons and get their gold, and which he brought back faithfully. And but maybe it was a argument over percentage. These things will go. And here's the other most famous British mariner, Captain Cook, who circumnavigated the Southern Ocean in 1768 to 1771, never got sight of Antarctica. So he goes back to the British Academy and says, it's like High Brazil. It doesn't exist. Take it off all our maps. And that's what they would do. They would always update their maps. So this is the map that Captain Cook came up with. No Antarctica now. So Captain Cook published his diaries of the Southern Ocean. And look at how accurate Australia is now at this point, but no Antarctica. And he published his diaries, and he said, down in Antarctica, there are abundant whales and seals, and there's so much resources there. And that triggered a migration of merchant marines going down there, just sailors of fortune, and they nearly made several species of whale extinct from this just wholesale slaughter, which are still rebounding to this day. The seal population is now back to what it was, but as it occurs to this map, they're going down there, and it was the whalers and the sealers in 1821 that discovered Antarctica. So we're talking centuries before those maps I showed you. Here it is, totally taken off of Captain Cook's map, and then clearly it comes back on. And where those mariners landed, this is a map from only 1940. We just found it recently. And in 1940, here's Terra Incognita, that squiggly line. They don't know what's there. They didn't even accurately depict it. But they thought that the Palmer Peninsula was still an archipelago. Okay, this is just over 80 years ago now. Some of you guys were being born around this time, or shortly thereafter, look, they're making this up. There are no channels through the Palmer Peninsula. It's one giant peninsula. This is exactly where I went sailing from the southern tip there.
Can you point
Yes, sure.
terra incognita?
This part. These lines are all fake. They had no idea what was there, but they kind of knew it connected to other parts.
Terra incognita?
Just means unknown land in Latin.
Okay.
And this is they called it an archipelago. It is not an archipelago. It is a solid peninsula all the way through. So that's super interesting. And there you can also see the flight of a bird when he discovered the hole under the ice. He would go back subsequently later and fly into that hole. But that's a lecture for another time. And I just want to end this mariner journey, and we're going to move on to the polygonal architecture. But this does set up this global network. These are sacred places, very important locations. So many of them are found on this planetary grid. If you people familiar with ley lines and the cycle of energy through the planet, that you would have these locations found right there, these ancient sites. So keep this map in mind as we kind of do a world trip. How do those energy grids connect? Well, I don't think it's anything. Are they mapped?
How do they know where they are and put them on a map?
Well, that's what the yellow dots are. Those each coordinate with one of those sites you see on the outside of the map.
But the ley lines themselves.
How are the ley lines detected? Well, I think it started with people who were, they call it witching for water, and it's people who use the different devices to find well water, and they would detect energy flowing, dowsing rods, and it was mostly started around England. And then I think the ley line grid kind of started to appear when they were able to dowse in different locations. But isn't it interesting, all of these ancient sites happen to be on quite a bit of these grid points. Now keep in mind, Earth is an ocean planet. We don't really know that, but that Pacific Basin right there, just a mile away, largest body of water on the planet, 71% of this planet is covered with water. Now we're only on the 29% of the surface covered in land. So you can't even really tell the big ocean expanses from this map. From this map, which by the way, here's your Mercator projection. See how big Greenland is? It's not that way on a globe, but when you project it, those northern latitudes on a flat surface, everything grows and expands. So let's start in South America, which is where I went right before and after the Antarctica trip 4 years ago with Brian Forrester and Nassim Harriman and Adam Apollo. We were all on this trip together. And this place, Sacsayhuaman, just above Cusco. So this is at 13,000 feet. You can see how small people are compared to some of these blocks. How they move these from a quarry to this location. Another episode of Ancient Aliens I was on was talking about the island of Nan Madol in Micronesia. It's the island of Ponape, and the site's called Nan Madol. And it was this megalithic site, and I proposed on the show that they were using an as yet known form of science, which is called auditive levitation. And auditive levitation has been proven in scientific laboratories. You can go on YouTube and see a bowling ball levitating, or they'll put a frog, a living frog, kind of flailing around, but levitating. So this is a science that is emerging, but how the ancients may have employed it to build these giant megaliths is another story. Another thing that I was proposing, and we were talking about a lot on this trip, was all of these stones that seem to have been rendered malleable. sort of like wet clay. And this is a trowel marks, is what it reminded me. On the left there is the unfinished Osiris obelisk in Lower Egypt. And it too appears to have trowel marks or been made somewhat malleable. So Nassim Haramein, who is a physicist, and Brian Forrester agreed with him, said that they had another lost science, which they called cold plasma. And they would render these stones somewhat wet and soft. And you'll see in some of these pictures how perfectly fit they are. Like they almost were just melted or formed into each other. Of course, on the upper left, you have a different style than on the lower right. And so Brian and Nassim and others were saying that this is the building technique of the Incas below on the right, far inferior to the earlier culture, the pre-Incans, who really built the megaliths of Machu Picchu and other locations all around Peru. And you'll see how they connect, they turn on the wall, and how much bigger they are than the inferior Spanish designs. And they lock together using little to no mortar. The old Peruvian ones, they don't use mortar. And here's a great example of polygonal architecture. So polygon is many different angles. You think, why go to all that trouble? Just if you're already chipping stones like the academics say they did it, why not chip perfect rectangles and not go to all that trouble? Well, it turns out this polygonal architecture is earthquake proof, or virtually so, that it will survive incredible shaking. And of course, Peru is right along the big volcanic zone, the Ring of Fire as it's called, that goes all the way around the Pacific Basin. And they've had some big shakers there, even contemporary. And then you look at some of these. Why go to all that trouble? Why not just do easy ones? It's almost like they were challenging future generations to, okay, I dare you. You guys make a wall that looks like this. And now you can see how it kind of, the gravity takes it to the bottom and it creates these knobs. I'll show you some other pictures where it's a lot more pronounced. But how it kind of not only fits so perfectly, and we were even trying it at Oye Tutambo to put a credit card or a piece of paper in between some of these joints with little success. The other thing that's super fascinating about Peru, all of their water flows continue to work. In some cases, they had to pull out some debris to get them to flow, but as soon as they did, out they come. They call them fountains, and they flow still to this day. Here's our group. There's Brian on the far left, Nassim with some indigenous people. And now you get a size of scale of these blocks at Sacsayhuaman. Easily taller than the ceiling in this room. That one on the left. So 30 to 35 feet tall. Just ginormous. 70 tons. And once again, expertly fitted together. So even with the current technology we have today, the CNC cutters, diamond cutters, lasers, they've still been unable to duplicate these feats of engineering. They tried to reconstruct the Great Pyramid on much smaller scale in Japan, and they failed miserably. Couldn't do it, not even close. Just using our conventional techniques of carving, cutting, moving, couldn't do it. So let alone Sacsayhuaman. They were also very knowledgeable about the changing of seasons. This stone is called Intihuatana, and it is still an accurate solar and lunar calendar. By the shadow that upright stone projects, you can determine times of year. Now, to paleo people, and we have our medicine wheels in this country, I did a book called sacred places in North America and showed the medicine wheels. To early people, knowing the changing seasons is really a matter of life or death. Why do I say that? Because if you don't know when to plant your seeds, if you don't know when to migrate from Canada down to your summer grounds in Kansas, you could get caught in a storm. You could plant your seeds and no rain comes. So knowing the seasons was utmost important to the prehistoric people. And there are many examples worldwide of how they did it in forms of calendars. And this is in Ollantaytambo, which Brian Forrester said was the oldest inhabited, continuously inhabited town in the world. Imagine living in a house that's made of old megaliths. How cool would that be? Yeah, party at my house tonight. Just come through that door and see the inside of my megalithic house. That wouldn't suck. Here's some examples of some of these perfectly fitted stones, also from Ollantaytambo. And now here you can see not only the marshmallowing, the roundedness of the stones, but also some of the knobs. Look at some of those precise fits. I mean, really. So you'd have to come in with this stone first. That one would have to fit exact, and keep on going. How did they do it? It's still a mystery to this day. Now we start going around the world, and you'll start seeing similarities. So I really like it when you can start to pick up patterns. Well, look, polygonal architecture in Syria, in Spain, in Russia. Here we go to Israel, Palestine, and Egypt. Now note in Egypt, again, those megalithic stones make the curve of a building. That is extremely difficult to do. To curve that stone right in the middle of Egypt and fit it so precisely with that lower stone that is ready to take that fitted stone. And you can see the size of proportion to some of these other megaliths. The biggest and greatest, there's our friend Hugh Newman on top, showing the size of Baalbek and those other individuals in the circle. The green is giving you an outline. Now, if you went there and read up on Baalbek, they'd say, oh yeah, it was a Roman temple, and surely there is a Roman temple, or the ruins of it still there today. But look at the foundation of the base. These are some of the largest hewn stones in the world, and they still do not have a crane big enough to move some of the stones at Baalbek. So how these were moved, and they have the quarry, and there's even, it's called the Pregnant Lady. It's still in situ, it's still in the quarry, and that is the largest hewn stone in the world. But to get them from the quarry, not only have blocks on top and up below, but how to move them and get them so precisely fitted. These are truly some of the greatest mysteries in the world, and this is why it's esoteric. This is why we didn't get any of this information in school. Moving on to, I'm going to show you a bunch of different continents with this very distinct polygonal architecture. Here's in Ethiopia. It's called the Stele Field. And look at the one on the upper left. It's got that little thumb stone. Oh, well, we can't forget that. Let's get that in there. And I kind of akin it to the old Hermetic saying, as above, so below. So here you have polygonal stone masonry in an ancient Roman amphitheater, and below a plant cell structure under a microscope, which turns out to be polygonal. So did the ancients have this lost technology as well, and got their cue card from structures under a microscope? Back to Italy, more polygonal architecture, some really big. That's J.J. Ainsworth, Hugh Newman's partner. Work with them and we share information. Let me use some of these pictures. Massive blocks, just incredible. Back to Asia. Now we have India with these megalithic structures, even polygonal architecture. You can see some irregular shapes in some of these rock formations. Some of the oldest temples in Europe are on the island of Malta and Gozo, and also Sardinia. And Sardinia has the bonus of many giant bones being found, and many of these temples even being named for the giants. And that's another occurrence with a lot of these megaliths around the world. In Holland, they call them Hunebedden, and it means giant tombs. And it is also very much megalithic, polygonal architecture, and then so much more.
Human bones?
They call it Hunebedden. It means giant's bed. It's just a Dutch way of saying it. And
Yeah, I was there in Peru outside of Cusco. I've been to Ola Tamampo. But I'm going to ask maybe a stupid question. So if these were really advanced, if civilizations were advanced as they appear to be,
Yeah.
to be able to do that, isn't that more advanced than just being able to advance cement? I mean, I know this is stupid, but I mean, can't you just make cement and you just pour it into a form? And wouldn't that be less technologically advanced than what we're looking at here?
okay, let me. I'm only about halfway through, and I think I got about 30 minutes left. So I'll just give you a quick answer to that. So he said, what about just pouring cement? Yes, some of them definitely are, and there are theories that even the pyramids were poured cement. However, when you have the quarry and the stone matches, and you can actually sometimes find even little artifacts in the stone in the quarry that are sometimes fossilized, then it's a pretty good match. It's a pretty accurate match. So I do think that some of them, including Pumapunku and Tiwanaku, were poured concrete, and that does give a pretty good explanation of it. And so
Maybe there's another reason for
the stones to be polygonal. But even if it was poured concrete, well, first of all, maybe it could go bigger than that. I mean, look at our poured concrete buildings of today. Why go to the trouble of creating these polygons and then having this marshmallow effect or the knobs at the bottom, which appear to be the gravity affecting them in different ways? So here we are in Greece, quite a few. Greece is a very ancient country, as is Italy. Two of the oldest, boy, they go way back, some of these thousands of years. Not just what we've been told since the age of the archaic Greeks and the Etruscans in Italy, but way back to a megalithic era of polygonal architecture. And then I had the great opportunity of being an English teacher in Japan and going to the Imperial Palace in both Tokyo, and these are pictures in Osaka. Now, the Osaka castle got completely destroyed in World War II, but not the foundation. This foundation is ancient. And when you see the lichen on it and how big some of these blocks are, it is just amazing. Some more pictures. There's the Osaka castle, completely restored, got bombed out in World War II, but how do you destroy megaliths of this size? And they just rebuilt the donjon, is what it's called. It was the shogun of the Middle Ages of Japan, and the shogun would live on the top floor of that castle there. And these are all defensive fortifications. Interesting, like European castles using a series of moats, and sometimes these star fort structures when viewed from top. But then also here in Osaka Castle, just some megaliths that defy all odds, including sometimes you get these megalithic one-off stones like this Masuda Iwafuni stone, just carved as a megalith, but in a jungle, just sitting there with these perfect right angles, and must have had some kind of form in the past or usage to be out there to do it. back to Europe in Bosnia, former Yugoslavian country, also home to the Bosnian Pyramid, which Dr. Sam Osmanovic, who I've come to know and like, offers me a free tour if I can ever get to Bosnia. And by the way, under Bosnia are underground chambers. Now, how do you fake that? And the pyramid itself, under the Pyramid of the Sun, as it's named. And he says below that pyramid, you can do, there's just the focus of a pyramid will make it that you can heal underneath there. And people will go down with different ailments and come out an hour later and feel great and like it went away. So there's a power to the pyramid, and that's a whole other talk. But for now, let's stay with this polygonal architecture here in Albania. There are so many. This could easily have been the crux of the entire talk. But one thing that's really interesting in this Albania one, you can see the gloss, the finish. There's a shine to some of these. And this is what's known as vitrification. Vitrification is when you heat up a stone so much, it actually starts to melt, or you get a shiny sheen on it. And a lot of these polygonal architectures, also attesting to how old they are, have this sheen to them. And you can see, obviously, the rocks in the back don't. Some do, some don't. There's some old castles in Scotland that are completely vitrified, even to the point where they're melting over the other ones, as well as in Egypt. So did the ancients have nuclear weapons or some kind of heat beams or direct energy weapon? It would seem that you cannot create a fire and vitrify stone. So their lifting ability is just staggering in both weight and sheer numbers of these blocks. And here you can see some pretty unusual shapes in Turkey. Polygonal architecture, to be sure. And even in Mexico, coming back to Central America, some incredible stoneworks that somebody sent to me. Here's it says Chile, but it's actually, this is Easter Island. Very famous stone, one of the platforms of the Moai. And look at that little stone right in the middle. It's almost like they did that on purpose to highlight their polygonal or megalithic abilities of construction. And if we look around the world, pyramids everywhere. I don't even think Dr. Sam made it on the list. But before this list was made, you have this ancient pyramid in Tahiti, clearly made out of stone. Looking at it a little closer, it's not quite megalithic, more like bricks and some blocks. The top part has some blocks. So pyramids around the world, another talk, truly fascinating. How did all these cultures around the world come up with the same idea of a four-sided pyramid? This is the Cholula pyramid, largest pyramid in the Americas. Hardly anybody knows about it. And it too is covered with vegetation like the Bosnian pyramid, only to be rediscovered as artificially made. Of course, the Spanish got there and they said, oh, you know what, we're going to just tear down those idols and put up a church. And that's what remains there to the day. So if we look at the temperature of the Earth, this might give us some clues as to the period of time that these polygonal constructions were made. I think a lot of us have heard of the warming at the end of the Younger Dryas. So you can see that the Earth was quite a different temperature just 13,000 years ago. Of course, this was the last ice age. The last two ice ages are represented here. The final one is the Younger Dryas cooling, started to come to an end about 10,000 years ago. And then you get to the top layer where we are today with a whole bunch of pretty normal looking graphs. Now, can that flip up or down? I think we've all just experienced a pretty cold and wet winter out here out west, and maybe we're going more towards a cooling than a warming. This graph, of course, these things work in very long cycles. They're not really too easily manipulated or seen a big change over time. But here we have a little ice age that just occurred in the last 1,000 years, and they obviously have a bias for global warming. I think with that first map I showed you of Antarctica, there are areas that are cooling and there are areas that are warming. And it probably is human induced. But Mother Nature, in her great wisdom, keeps those ocean levels intact. Otherwise, we might be underwater right here. So here we go back to the marine environment. Humans have been fascinated with and swimming underwater, like these Assyrian divers, using some kind of breathing device. Early scuba, which is an acronym for self-contained underwater breathing apparatus. There he has one, thousands of years ago. This is what it would have looked like in that ice age period of 10,000 plus years ago, where you have the land bridge that connects all of the archipelago of Indonesia as well as Australia. So that's how the Australian Aboriginals walked to Australia, which are the oldest recognized intact cultural people in the world. Australia is a fascinating country. Unfortunately, their native people have not suffered the best plight, but at least they're still there, and they're starting to reclaim their culture, like the Peruvians and Bolivian native cultures, and it's good to see. But as it was with the global sea levels, much, much lower than they are today. So now I'm going to show you some underwater archaeology. So keep in mind this map, because how do you create megalithic architecture that is now underwater unless it was dry land to begin with? So this is showing you that these monuments must be 10,000 years or older. So starting with the Gulf of Cambay, this is off of India, and they found a whole cityscape underneath there. Dozens of underwater archaeology sites, and this is off the coast of Gujarat. Let me just come back and I'll point that out. Right up here. Coast of Gujarat. So you can see clearly on this map that that was exposed land during the last ice age. Some of the sonar scanning of it, and there's a new science called marine archaeology, which is being employed to find these places. And boy, there's so many. Right off the coast of Alexandria in Egypt. They've even got a name for it. It was Heracleion, named for the underwater architecture. As above, so below. Once again, that Hermetic axiom showing that there was something going on underwater. This one's probably one of the most famous because it was predicted by Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, who said that in 1968, evidence for Atlantis would be found in the Caribbean. Bimini is an island just off of Florida, and there you go. In 69, the Bimini Roads was discovered. And these are massive megalithic blocks, right angles. You can see the scale with those divers there, and then this is the scanning sonar. It's kind of an L-shaped road. Could have been an ancient dock in Bimini, but now clearly underwater. Here's one of the latest finds. This one was discovered by a fisherman who was scanning for fish around the Azores Islands. And what did he find? A pyramid. Now we got underwater pyramids. We could add those to the list with this flat top, and look at that perfect symmetry. That would be quite an exception if that was a natural formation. This is another one that's fairly recently discovered by treasure hunters looking for Spanish galleons. This is very deep. This one's 750 meters, so that's close to 2,500 feet underwater. So this could only have dropped down during a cataclysmic event, such as a pole shift when the continents move shape and move around. But doesn't that look just like a Mayan or Central American city in North America? They were earthen mound pyramids because they didn't have stones to work with. And this is the actual sonar that came back. And there's an interesting side note to this, that before this was even discovered, only about 15, 20 years ago, remember Bob Lazar, the famous whistleblower? So he gave an account of the government, the Navy, knew about this site. They've known about this for decades. Didn't tell anyone, of course. And they went down there and found, I guess we'll call it a UFO, some kind of aerial vehicle that actually still had its motor intact. So what they did was they pulled it up, they took the motor, and they sent it to the scientists out at Area 51. Said, and it was Edward Teller himself, the father of the H-bomb, that said, all right, guys, just cut it open. Let's see what's inside. It created a nuclear explosion, killed all the scientists. And Bob Lazar said that's why he was brought in, because they needed a whole new crop of workers. So props to those lost scientists who probably never even got a proper memorial. And it came from this site. And so there's another, they call them Bob Lazar proofs. So many different things that he talked about in the 1980s have come to become true, such as his element 116. Now it is a real element. They have discovered in a laboratory, but it was not yet discovered when he talked about it as the power source to some of these generators to fly these craft that he saw at S4, which is a sub base right outside of Area 51. Another Bob Lazar proof is he said that there are these big bay doors on the western portion, another mountain range over from Area 51. Just in the last couple months, you can now go to Google Earth and look at Area 51, and it'll show you S4. So it's like they're starting to put out information in this kind of roundabout way. And it's true with Antarctica too. I'm noticing they're starting to show a lot more detail, and Dr. Michael Sala had a whistleblower that gave him some coordinates in New Schwabenland on this rocky plateau, and you can clearly see structures and buildings that had not been known about before. So, and now it's on Google Earth. Now you can go to those coordinates and there it is. So I think this is kind of part of a soft disclosure. They don't announce it, they'll just tell Google, okay, now you can put it on there. Because believe me, I've looked at Antarctica for the hole in the ice, and it's not even a very good job of Photoshop masking. You see these right angles, just a white square. Okay, you're not looking at that. Maybe someday we'll take off the masking, but right now, forget about it. Okay, here we go. Now this is the mother of all sunken ruins. Another one, a recent discovery, Yonaguni, off the island called Yonaguni, which is actually the southernmost in the Japanese archipelago of islands. And some guy was just looking for lobsters, swimming around, scuba diving, and then he come across this. Now, how in heck's name do you try to carve that underwater? So it must have been created when those sea levels were quite different. And if I just flip back, I'll show you where it is on the map of, oh shoot, just off the map, but here's Taiwan. So it's Yonaguni is about right there, but you can clearly see you can walk to Taiwan. You can walk to the Philippines. Oh, almost walk to the Philippines. Oh, well, maybe you get around that way. And people have an incredible ability of getting everywhere on this planet except Antarctica. Nobody ever lived on Antarctica until now. And in the winter months down there, only 1,000 people on the 5th largest continent of the world live in Antarctica. So, of course, they have to live in pressurized, warm environments. Let's go back to Yonaguni. Well, I'd love to go scuba dive this site. We were talking to a event producer about doing an event in Japan, and I was going to volunteer to take any certified scuba divers out there and check out Yonaguni. And while I was looking at this site, I thought maybe there's a counterpart on the island. In fact, I did find what looked like some old roads and maybe carved cliff face right above Yonaguni. Should maybe add that image to the future show here. But this is a massive site. The diver on the left there, that's to scale. And look at those right angles. That is really hard to produce, or nature doesn't do it that way. Nature wouldn't carve it out. And actually Yonaguni even goes to the other side, on both sides of it too. You can see some other right angles carved right out of it. So this is up on Lake Titicaca, the largest alpine lake in the world. This bisects Peru and Bolivia. And here, indeed, they've also found underwater ruins and roads and a whole bunch of stuff on the Bolivia side. Lake Titicaca is really interesting. It's a volcanic caldera, extinct, but it has freshwater seahorses. That has never occurred anywhere in the world except Lake Titicaca, which suggests that this caldera had been at sea level. Seawater might have rushed in or had been at ocean level, rose up to 13,000 feet, and through time when the water was displaced and became fresh water, that these seahorses managed to live. And that it has underwater ruins, and then the very famous site called Tiwanaku and Pumapunku are about 3 miles now inland, but there were piers and docks that it had once been on lake level. So that particular site, everybody agrees, is pre-Incan. And that particular site, especially Pumapunku, was like a kid's Lego set that was just thrown everywhere and just scattered all around. But boy, some of the most incredible rock cut pieces. And there I would say some of those do look like poured concrete. The angles are so precise, and you can kind of see the little bubbles when you get concrete. They're not quite the same. The stone's not the same as when you quarry it. When you quarry it, you get little artifacts such as fossils. Sometimes you can see in them, and so much more. So it's kind of along the lines of these sacred places, the sacred geometry in sacred places, and that's my talk for today. Thank you guys so much for coming out. Thank you. I think we're going to have some time for questions. We're going to send a mic around. So in the back there, here comes the mic.
Yeah, I have a question about the polygonal shape.
Yeah.
Is that because it prevents the damage from earthquakes?
Great question. So she said the polygonal structure, is that for resistance of earthquake? Well, I'll tell you that it certainly does resist the earthquakes, and it would be a good reason to do it. What I was trying to show in the presentation, though, is this is truly a worldwide phenomenon, that you find these sites all over, and it does appear to be a lost science of building. So perhaps they were factoring in earthquakes or other natural disasters, and that was the superior building style. Okay, microphone's coming around. Got a couple more questions? Yeah, out here in front.
I don't know. To me, it's obvious that extraterrestrial aliens inhabited the Earth and were able to manipulate all the stones to the pyramids. And this is blowing my mind, all the worldwide. So it's obvious to me they were able to move it through vibrations
Right.
and sound.
Auditive levitation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's like that's obvious now to
Yeah.
me. I had no idea that these unbelievable structures were put together so magnificently
Right.
So you got to just throw your arms up. Now, when you mentioned about the underground, now of course, to me it seems like the negative excuse me, Dracos, going underground and kidnapping our kids and using it for adrenochrome. That's been going on a long time. And the main thing is about wars throughout,
Yeah.
the aliens trade loosh for technology. They did that with Marina Orsic and the Nazis.
Right.
So they told the Nazis, we'll give you the way to get to space, but you better make loosh. And they sure did a good job with
make
blood,
war,
sweat,
yeah.
agony. And I think the Foo Fighters, I don't know, didn't they get really close to the action and the pilots saw
Yeah.
UFO because they just love to be in the front row.
The glowing
to get
orbs
all
following
that
the Allies
loosh
planes. Yeah,
and
yeah,
all
yeah.
that agony,
Yeah.
fear. And this is what Klaus Schwab, if Klaus Schwab was here listening to your lecture like we did,
We might convert him.
things would change. Things would change.
The World Economic for us
Yeah.
might be for you.
Yeah, but anyways, and Brad, I have your books on paper, reel, and on Audible, and I listen to you in the wee hours when I get up.
Oh, that's
and
so kind.
Great, and this is just great. So
And you'll find these books. I'll be out at the table right after the talk there and can sign some copies for you. Also, just want to point out, I'll be here at 2 o'clock. I'm filling in for Laura Eisenhower. Couldn't make it. And I'm going to do the hidden esoteric in plain sight. So kind of a pivot away from this material, but similar in that they're hidden knowledge.
does anybody want questions?
Yeah, we got a couple more all around.
Hey, Brett.
Hey.
Yo. Oh, I don't think this works. Anyway.
Talk close.
Well, you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you. I'll
Yeah,
repeat it.
Can you tell me a little bit more about exactly what underwater archaeology is under Lake Titicaca, which is such a power spot in its, nature?
Right, so she's asking about underwater archaeology. Also, the home of the Great White Brotherhood. Lot of UFO sightings out of Lake Titicaca. That kind of
Titicaca-wise,
makes you wonder.
What exactly is going on down there, to your knowledge?
Yeah, I think there's a UFO base.
Okay, but I mean in terms of archaeological evidence.
Well, it's very ancient. The caldera is very, very old, and it's evident when you see it in the rock formations around there. And all the megaliths, there's these round towers around Lake Titicaca that are quite...
Caldera under Lake Titicaca?
Caldera just is a word for a big volcanic crater.
So in your lecture, you ended basically with talking about the underwater archaeological sites found under Lake Titicaca. I was just wondering if anything came to mind, were they pyramids? Were they just pile of rubble?
Yeah, I need to find some pictures. The ones I've seen are real kind of cloudy. It's down there, and freshwater lakes are a bit murky. They just look like rectangular foundations and some roadways.
Well, then let's go down there and find out.
Let's get out. All right. Who's booking the tickets?
I
Yeah, all right.
It's very important to me, that spot.
Yeah, oh, good. Well, suffice it to say, it's a very important spot to the Peruvians and
Well, I need
Bolivians.
to know it.
Yeah. I'll tell you more in a sec. Hey.
Since there's geothermal activity under the ice in Antarctica,
Yeah.
big piece, like most stuff. So, and it's been there for years, maybe centuries.
Yeah.
Right? So, wouldn't there be underwater life? Wouldn't there be aquatic life?
Absolutely.
What do you know about it?
Well, it's in my talk, Hidden Anomalies, because there's a lake called Lake Vostok, which is one of the top 10 freshwater lakes in the world nobody's ever heard of. It's about the size of Lake Ontario under the ice. And the Russians finally got it drilled 2 miles through and finally got a clean sample only a few years ago. And they found a certain kind of bacteria that grows on fish that has never been identified. So presumably there's even fish and aquatic life that live in Lake Vostok that... as yet discovered. So the real great mysteries, the last unknown places of the world are really Antarctica and the deepest depths of the ocean. So still discoveries coming out of Antarctica just about every year.
I mean, who knows what kind of aquatic life there could be?
Right.
Could be the species we've never heard of.
That's right. Yeah. I think we got time for 2 more. We got 1 and 2.
I can speak loud enough. Can you all hear me?
Speak loud enough.
All right, I'll just speak loud enough. So I was watching, I
We'll get
saw
you.
Matthew
Oh, yeah.
Talking about the vitrification of the rocks and how some of them look burned.
Yep.
And his theory was that the ozone layer at certain parts opened during that time when the heat went from really low to really high on that map you had. And I'm just curious if you have heard him talk about that, if you've seen that, or what your thoughts on that.
I've not.
First I'd heard of it.
That's the first I've heard of it too. And let's just say it's an open-ended question. How did these stones get vitrified? But the point is, some kind of extreme heat hit them, and they even show signs of melting.
And he said that in certain places, it was just one side of the rock. It wasn't the whole
Right.
thing. So that was why that was. So you might want to talk to Matthew.
Yeah, no, that's great. If I bump into him, I'd like to ask him about that. Now, there is a temple, I think it's in Dendera, where there's a stairway that goes down, and it's melted right down the middle of it. So how would ozone hit that, or even a nuclear bomb?
Like the ozone layer opened so the light came through in just that
Okay.
little section.
Did he show that spot?
No, he just said that
It's over
that was his
dancing
theory of
last
what,
night.
how you could get to 200 degrees Fahrenheit to melt rock.
Right.
That was one theory.
Okay.
I'm tossing that.
All right.
Go talk to
Thank you.
Matthew.
I will. Okay, last question. I'll let you guys out of here.
Are you have an opinion on, I've heard about a site in India that was where this particular presentation said there was radioactive or evidence of radioactive activity, like let's say a bomb like
Yeah.
type of a thing.
It's actually in the Indus River Valley, which is present-day Pakistan, but several sites, two I know of, Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, when they lifted the topsoil and started to take all of the debris away and find the village, they also found people who were laying in the streets, almost like Pompeii, that just died very suddenly. And then they put a Geiger counter over them, very highly radioactive. And so those sites also got hit by something with radioactivity, similar to a nuclear bomb. Then you look in the Vimanas, those flying craft that are in the earliest Indian text, flying crafts, super high-tech devices, maybe what we would call directed energy weapons. Perhaps that could have been the heat source too, because that heat's very hot. So a lot of lost technology, a lot of mysteries, and some of this kind of all starts coming together that way.
What's your opinion on the suppression of these things?
Suppression of these things, it's kind of like, why did the Smithsonian come in and dump all the giant bones into the ocean? I think it just upsets the apple cart and doesn't quite fit the standard historical model, and it's easier just to say, oh no, that doesn't exist. You know what? That's interesting you bring that up, because that Yonaguni site, for the longest time, for the first 15 years, Nat Geo just denied it. Denied, blow it off, don't talk about it. They have finally admitted, okay, there's a site there and it was made by the hand of humans. We're not sure when, but it's there. So that's what they do. They'll just kind of blow things off until they have to make a statement. And there you go. Well, hey guys, thank you so very much. Really appreciate you coming. And I'll be out at the table here if you want to ask some more questions and pick up a book.
I was taking pictures and texting my husband.
Oh,
It's funny. He was like,
see the synchronicity.
all right, I have to get water to make my approach.
Yeah. Keep going, you're not.
Right on, yeah, it's fantastic, love the work you're doing, fantastic work, yes. Huge student of all that stuff, been a fan forever. Do a little, all the way back. Come in here, okay, come on, thanks. Okay. Take your power. Thank you. Okay, so. He pops in and out, I'm the manager, so.
Probably an hour, probably not.
I'll just have it just in case.
Okay, okay,
I'm
good.
sitting up front.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Yeah.
I help Sean with
Okay, cool. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. We're basically in Austin, and folks don't in Austin, all the crews in Austin, we're actually more confused. Okay, yeah, I have the drive in. Sit close to the front row. As much as you can get. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Oh, cool. So why don't we just pop the drive in there and then just see what happens? I can just go through. Ask him where.
Avocado?
Yes.
Do you want us mainstreaming and bow?
First or second row?
Okay.
You guys cool with that?
I'll go right there. Right here?
No, no.
Here? Okay.
Here's the drive.
Just make sure to.
Okay, cool, awesome, excellent.
How are you doing this weekend? You having fun?
Yeah. We just got here yesterday. Yeah. We had a really good night last night. I mean, if this is any measure, I thought it was like 9 o'clock. I might even thought it was 8 o'clock. And I got to where it was 12:15. And I was like, whoa. It's conscious life, yeah. And all of that's in order. Yeah, if you put it on that way, we can pull it in and drive out.
All right, let's just see. All right. So it looks like it's coming from a Mac.
Yeah. It's coming from that.
All right. So let's see if there's a way to
Select
We're
them all.
clearing the room,
make it
everyone.
easy.
We're gonna get ready for the next speaker, so everyone can just exit and form a line outside.
Okay. First, there we go. That's it. That's all we need to do right there.
All right. Now this is the tester. Is it if we can get it to
Do that.
this, right?
I can always do it from here.
Let's see. Let's see.
You gotta
Okay.
go a little couple minutes to the left.
First, we're gonna turn this one on. No.
We have to go a little, couple inches to the left, like a little
Yeah.
bit
So this
more.
works. Now I just have to get all the screens to show this.
Yeah.
screen.
Maybe we have to go like.
So.
Should we
little
eject
like
that then?
Oh, yeah.
Back in here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Forget on the PC how you eject.
Me too.
Are you okay if I just pull it up?
Sure. No, of course.
Sorry about
Are you
that.
good? Alright. Alright, so I'm just gonna go into displays and get that to work.
Okay.
Alright, and you're good to go.
Awesome. Thank you.
We're trying to make it come to life back
Thank
here.
you.
Instead of having a we were supposed to do this last Thursday night, and they told us not to. They were gonna put the Conscious Life Expo signs up, which we can't stand. And then they didn't do it, so we could have done it.
Go figure.
Yay.
Yeah.
I see
It's
the
got that
purple violet
aloha-
flame back there.
It's got the aloha.
Hawaii, yeah, purple.
Little Hawaii
violet
for us, huh?
flame.
Those are like, I guess roughly.
Plumerias.
Yeah, okay. Plumerias. Love it.
So let me just make sure that's centered.
Actually, I was
Yeah, that looks-
painting
that's
this
good.
magnolia on Maui after I saw the night blooming,
Jasmines?
not the jasmines, not the hibiscus, it's that other.
The Brugmansia, the trumpet flower?
No, it's the one that has this incredible scent at night.
Um,
And it's.
Gardenias?
No, it's Sirius or Sirius, starts with.
Oh, night blooming Sirius?
Yes,
Oh, okay.
yes, that's
Oh.
what was
So
in-
it's a cactus flower.
That's right.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
That's right. Yeah, it was on Maui up high.
Mr. Wolf.
All right.
This is fancy water for you.
Thank you so much. Look at this.
You got some fancy, you got the same stuff?
Yeah.
Well, you got extra now.
Thank you so much. Okay, appreciate that.
Is there a way I could get a photo with you
Of course.
too? I'm sure you're probably sick of this after all the years of being famous. but
I don't mind this. As long as there's no flash, I could take
there's
pictures all day.
No flash at all.
Alright, it looks like you're good to go.
Okay, so
I don't
that's
see
my
a
last
full-
image, so.
I'll take it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Wait, that's not working again?
David, do you have anything that you need
Okay.
handed out on the chairs here?
No, no.
Okay. 1, 2, and, okay, that looks. Hang on one second. 1, 2, and, all right. Thank you.
Right on, thanks, right on, thank you.
Let me look at
I'm
it.
trying to figure out why the last one is first and see what happens.
That's fine in that format right there, by the way.
This,
Yes.
So it's in the right order still?
Yep.
Okay.
Everything's looking good.
So, the only thing is the last one is first. So I'm gonna try to reselect it.
That's okay. I mean, you're talking about like the way it comes up in the order.
Yeah.
maybe I need one more pen.
There might be. You're gonna see it from the front.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm still not doing it.
Yeah, it keeps doing that.
It's okay. Not a big deal.
All right.
I do a couple of these in the back. just
Oh,
to give
great,
time.
okay.
Yeah.
Do I have 90 minutes? Is that
90
correct?
minutes,
Okay.
and I'll be back there, and I'll just kind of wave it around until I
All right, there
notice
you go.
saw it, or
Okay,
whatever.
thank
Thanks.
you. Yeah, awesome. Thanks for that help. That's great. This is great.
All right, man.
How do I do? Oh, God.
Wait, no, that's not right. Okay, you tell me.
Yeah, it's going down on that right side.
This has to come up a little bit.
Look at avocado. You're a gap toother, are you?
I wasn't born that way, but over the years, my teeth have separated out.
I love-
Yeah,
I
isn't
love-
that interesting?
Oh, yeah, gap tooth.
Yeah.
Uh-huh, good.
Isn't that crazy?
My
What do
husband
they
had
say
a gap
about gap
tooth.
people?
There's something about it, yeah,
Yeah.
but I wasn't born, I definitely was not born that way. In fact, I was, the way I was when my teeth came in,
Oh, you're lucky. It's supposed to be the Africans say it's a very auspicious thing to have.
Yeah, that's what he.
yeah, and
Yeah.
so initially, when I was a kid, my teeth grew in, for this front tooth, this right tooth was in front of this one.
Oh, my gosh,
Uh-huh.
did you have to have braces?
No, my mom told me, she said, constantly push it, keep pushing it, and eventually it'll go into place.
Or anything like that?
No, so she just said, push it into place, push it into place.
That's
And she
exactly
was right, and it got it into place. And then,
Yes.
but then when I became a raw foodist in my 20s, about 4 or 5 years into that, that's when the gap developed.
What a
Yeah, that
trip,
drip,
what
that
a
was definitely not
trip.
born with that.
I woke up wanting to ask you questions, I can't remember anything now. Oh, that's just a note from.
Yeah, this is a Rudolph Steiner jacket, by the way.
Is it
Yeah, so
really?
this
Oh, that's
jacket was
cool.
given to me. I'll tell the story.
You
This,
mean it was his?
well, it was
Oh.
given to me by a friend who received it from the Anthroposophical Society of Switzerland, or from Dornach.
Yeah.
He gave it to me as his last dying wish.
Wow.
Old friend of mine, Michael Command. And when I I didn't know he was dying of cancer, and I went over to his
You knew
house.
Michael, you didn't know Michael was dying of cancer.
Yes,
Your
yes,
friend.
yeah. No, this is back about 15 years ago, and I didn't know he was dying of cancer. So I went over to his house, and he had all his family there and stuff like that. And he said, he took me in the back room. He took his shirt off, and he had myelomas. And when I saw it, I was like, he's not gonna make it. Holy shit, this is as bad as it gets.
Yeah.
And I had no idea, just completely random. I was like, oh my god. And so he gave it to me as like a gift, and
Wow.
But this did not belong to Rudolph Steiner.
we don't know the history of it actually. Yeah, who knows?
Yeah,
But it
good.
has the magic that Rudolph Steiner prescribed. When I got in the car after that night, and I sat in the car, and he also gave me the lecture about these garments that Rudolph Steiner had given. And when I got in the car, it was exactly 90 years previous to the day.
Wow.
Precisely. And I was like, oh, that was weird. When I started reading through it, like, that's. And so the story behind these is, we should wait till the event begins, because it's quite a story.
We might not be able to be here, and I'd love to hear
Oh,
that story,
well,
because we
then I'll
have to
tell you.
go do a-
So Rudolph Steiner described that for EMF protection
Uh-huh.
in the future,
Really?
yeah, that you would need an animal fiber woven with a peat fiber from a peat bog. So peat, like those
Yes.
those peat bogs in northern Scotland where they pull those kings out and they still have their skin on and they're 2,000 years
Right.
old.
Yeah.
So the peat grass, when it
Moss.
or the
Peat
peat
moss.
grass, when it forms, because there's two things that can grow in there, a peat moss and a peat grass.
I see.
And you can take that grass and you can weave it into a garment,
Uh-huh.
but it has to be an animal fiber, and it has to be done by a mentally retarded or mentally handicapped or autistic person,
Because they've got a clear
because they have
channel.
no ego.
Yeah.
Wow.
And when you do that, you liberate the spirit of the bog into the garment. So that the problem with those bogs is that the forces of evolution are stunted. That's why the kings can be pulled out of there 2,000 years later. They still have their skin, tattoos, everything's there. They weren't recycled by nature because those highland peat bogs in Norway, Scotland, Iceland, etc., are the recycling forces are stunted, and so the spirits of those places are stuck in suspended animation. And if you can take the garment and liberate a spirit by using the egoless personality of the autistic person or mentally handicapped or retarded person, the spirit will come into the garment and possess the garment, and that's what he described. And then he said what that spirit will do for you is lower the EMF from high frequency radiation to low frequency radiation, which is what your body can accommodate more. Now, this has been over 100 years that this stuff's been out there and people have been testing this stuff. These garments definitely reduce high frequency radiation too. This is peat. This is peat.
Really?
It's peat and wool together,
Yeah,
woven
you
together.
feel that grounding, that very grounded energy.
So when you put it on, can you?
Well, if the spirit protects you. So
Can you feel
oh, I feel it.
You're so
You know,
enveloped.
I have crossed so many crazy border situations. I've been in so many crazy situations with this on. You know, like if I was in a troubled situation, like going across a very tricky border with, you know, potential problems, always I have this on. Any airline flight, always have this on. Anything like that.
Wow.
It's become a prerogative because the spirit protects you. This garment it has a spirit in it.
Wow. Does Wolfie have anything comparable to wear, you know, when you're going?
You mean Wolfina?
Wolfina.
Wolfina.
Oh, Wolfina, of course,
Well,
that's better.
we've gotten other garments. Like for example, I went skiing last year with a garment that was given to me by a friend. It's a Rudolf Steiner wool knitted with peat, and this is interesting. It had no, so it's one of those that cuts off right here, so your fingers stick out.
Yeah.
And I skied for 3 or 4 days with these pants and those gloves in the elements without getting cold.
That's incredible.
And that was wild too. I was like, whoa.
But
now
aren't you, because you've been.
No, I like cold, but the finger thing was, that really, I have to say, surprised me.
Wow.
Yeah, that I wasn't cold
Wow.
on my fingers that are exposed.
But what's his name that does all the breathing?
Wim Hof.
But he goes up into those
yeah.
really cold places because of the breathing.
Yeah,
because of
yes.
with all the detoxing you've done and the vegan
And I like cold. I mean,
You
I'm a
like the
cold,
cold?
I'm a cold plunger big time. I've been a cold plunger for 25 years, hardcore.
I
Maybe
want to
even
do,
longer.
I'm not.
So do you have a cold plunge at your place?
Oh yeah, no, I have a lake.
Oh, you have a
Yeah,
lake?
in Canada.
Oh, in Canada?
Yeah,
Nice.
so
But do you go back and forth?
I go back and forth. Yeah, so
Oh, I
the
do.
lake next to the house, when the
You're
snow
Canadian?
melts. No, I'm an American, but Wolfina's a Canadian.
Oh, she is.
Yes, so we've been going back and forth for 20 years. You know, ever since
You've
I met her.
been-
I've known her for 13 or 14 years. I met her on Twitter.
You did?
Yeah, what happened was that my page on Twitter kept getting stuck on her page for some reason, and it happened like 8 times. And finally, I was like, I'm probably supposed to meet this person. This is so weird how this person keeps coming up on my thing, and gets stuck on her page. And so I sent her a message on Twitter and on Facebook, because I found her on Facebook, and she responded. And she was actually at the Westin Hotel right here in LAX when she responded. She told me that today, or yesterday. I didn't even know that. She was in LA at the time. And she said, and I said, hey, I'm going to be, because I found out she was in Alberta, and I said, I'm going to be in Calgary doing an event.